this first team that we're going to cover is probably the biggest beneficiary of the transaction that they made during the trade deadline. They're cruising right now. They're doing a lot of great things. This is going to be the Golden State Warriors we're going to cover first on this podcast. Ever since they got Jimmy, man, they've been on a upward trajectory. They've been killing it, 12-2 in their last 14 games. They've won 10 straight with Jimmy Butler in the lineup, generating the fifth best offense. They have the second best defense over that stretch. By all accounts, this is a team that's looking pretty serious here. They're doing a lot of great things, and it seems like Jimmy has kind of reinvigorated this team by all accounts. Curry looks reinvigorated. Draymond, they kind of got out of those doldrums they were in the middle of the season. And I think Jimmy's been a great fit here because he's one of those guys that doesn't need the ball every possession. He's more than willing to let Curry do his thing, let other guys get involved. But at the same time, he can be aggressive and he can get into the paint and generate easy shots, generate a lot of free throws, which is something this team needed. They weren't really great at that before the trade. So now that he is there acting as a connector, generating rim attempts, getting things rolling for the Warriors, they look like a totally new team on both ends of the floor. Because as we know, based on his time with the Heat and other teams, I mean, he can lock down on the other end as well. So he's really helping the Warriors on both ends of the floor. So I guess my first question here, Law, to you to kind of start this off. When it comes to Jimmy, what have you noticed from him that's really kind of boosted this team to get them to this point? And now that he is with the team, do you kind of see this team as like a dark horse contender, ready to make a deep playoff run, or do you think they're still kind of missing something if they want to get to that level?
I think the most important thing Jimmy does is he complements what they have on both ends of the floor. Offensively, Jimmy gets in the line, which is something that the Warriors were terrible at for most of the season. And now you see that they are making up that free throw differential, and that goes on both ends of the floor. Jimmy Butler, I don't think gets enough credit for how well he defends, makes plays without fouling. Like Jimmy's had some seasons where he has more steals than fouls. I don't know if people realize how hard that is to do. Like
Right.
that's a Kawhi Leonard thing.
Yep.
And so if you got a guy who can defend multiple positions on the wing, make plays, not have guys go to the free throw line, you're going to be better defensively. And then on the other end of the floor, he's always going to be a guy who fits a motion offense. Like people who watch the Miami Heat had to see, like that Miami Heat team is always an adjustment for, especially when you are playing them and you haven't been used to, seeing the Heat. A lot of Western Conference teams are kind of shocked by the Heat's movement. Well, the Warriors, that's all we know with this era under Steve Kerr. Like they hate running pick and roll up there in Golden State. They like to have guys moving off the ball. So Jimmy's always was going to be very comfortable there. And to your point earlier, Jimmy gives you a guy who is different than Steph, different than any of those other guys. Like Jimmy gets to the line at a high rate. It's just really all it comes down to is everyone loved to talk about how the Warriors are playing and expanded rotation to begin the year. Expanded rotations are kind of a scam. Okay, no coach wants to play 12, 13 dudes because that means that he ain't comfortable playing non-dudes. Like trade some of them dudes to maximize your ceiling, especially when you got guys who are emotional and don't want to play as hard if they don't see they got a chance to do something special. And that's what the Warriors did. And you can see that from Draymond Green. When Draymond don't play with Steph, he plays different. When that Warriors ain't looking hot, Draymond can be different. Like Draymond not being available tanked the Warriors last year. This year Draymond, he's been at least on the court. He's been very focused. He's been very locked in. And since Jimmy got there, Draymond has been blowing offenses up. That kind of a thing makes the Warriors scary. Because when Steph is on his game, when Draymond is on his game, and now Jimmy's not getting suspended on a regular basis. He's playing games, right? Like Jimmy should be well rested after, Pat Riley and him couldn't see eye to eye in his last weeks in South Beach. Like that team obviously is catching lightning in a bottle right now. We'll see how long it lasts.
For sure, man. And something I want to point out here when it comes to their win streak, they haven't had the highest level of competition. A lot of those teams that they've played are not the best. So you have the Kings in there. You have the Mavericks in there, super banged up. The Pistons in there who have been pretty solid to this point, but still not necessarily a juggernaut. The Knicks that have been kind of up and down. So you look at who they've played, and I mean, there's solid teams in there, no doubt. But they're not exactly the type of like top tier contenders that you look at as like a good litmus test when it comes to like trying to figure out if they're a contender or not. They've already played their games against like the Celtics and the Thunder and the Cavaliers. So those aren't remaining on the schedule. But in the next week or so, I think they do have a few games coming up here that will be a good kind of test for where they could go from here. So looking at this team, it looks like they have a really good thing going. It remains to be seen if they're legit as far as a title contender. They haven't played those great teams yet, but some of them are coming up, and there'll be a really good test on what they can do here coming up in the next few weeks. But you touched on Curry when you were kind of breaking down the team a little bit, and I think he has been a huge beneficiary of Jimmy being back in the lineup here, or Jimmy coming into this team. Uh, Curry over his last 16 games, I mean, he's right up there at 30 points a game, 40% from three on 13 attempts, 6 assists. That's the type of Curry numbers that we're kind of accustomed to seeing from a guy that's been all NBA several times, been an MVP multiple times, a guy that's carried a team to a championship multiple times. And now that that version of Curry is back, it becomes easier to see them really making noise in the playoffs. Because before it was, he was around 20 to 25, and he was a good player, but not the type of top tier guy that we're used to seeing here necessarily from this team. So, I like to think that they are going to be scrapping the playoffs. They're going to give some teams some trouble, especially since they look pretty balanced and they have a good thing going on both ends of the floor. And like you said, that motion offense that the Kerr and the organization runs is such a benefit because it allows really everybody to get involved. And even if you're not playing 12 or 13 guys, you're playing 9 guys. All those guys are a threat every night. Moses Moody, Kevon Looney, like whoever it is, Quentin Post has been playing well recently. All those guys are kind of chipping in here. So, they're second in the league in bench scoring, 44.6 a game. I think that's a huge benefit for this team, and it allows some of those top tier guys to not get worn down, and they'll be fresh in the playoffs for sure. So, do you see this team as possibly kind of getting into that conference finals mix based on what they've displayed so far?
That part is interesting to me. The Warriors have only had one season, where they've been in the conference finals since Kevin Durant left in 2019. But because they won the title that year, people still think of the Warriors as that team that you have to fear. So, I mean, I think you have to have appropriate fear, of course, mainly because they have guys who have done it as far as getting finals. Like Jimmy hasn't won a chip, but he dragged multiple Miami Heat teams to the finals at least. Jimmy has the history of being a playoff riser. Draymond knows what it takes to adjust his game in the playoffs, and Steph is obviously one of the greatest of all time. The question is the rest of those dudes, like you making a playoff run. It's like, is your style of play going to be something that ends multiple team seasons? That's what that means. And I think that they are certainly a threat, but I think you got to look at, you know, who you'd have to face. Like right now, I think the Warriors' main thing, even with how well they've played, they had to have played this well to get to the top six. Like,
Mhm.
I don't think people realize how uninspiring this team was for as long a period of the season, like basically
Mhm.
from mid-November until they got Jimmy. Like this team was not they would have been happy just to stay in the play-in. So do I'm not putting them above teams that have played better for longer. And if you're but here's the thing, if you're six, can you knock off one of those, teams that are right now in the 3 or 4? Like you're talking about a Lakers matchup. Steph doesn't have the same energy against the Lakers as he does against some of these other teams. Now that would be a very intriguing first round series. I'm know damn well that the Warriors would much rather face a Grizzlies or a Rockets team, someone that they can try and intimidate, um, in the first round. Like they have a history of playing better against teams that are a little bit lower in that veteran weight class. So that's going to be the thing with me. Like who we're going to have this conversation now, and it's like, what can they do based off of who they're playing and the makeup of their schedule? But when April comes and we can actually see the matchups, that's when it's like, okay, who's got a good deal or not? Everyone who's participating in March Madness knows exactly how that is. You might like a team, then you might mess around and get in the wrong bracket. So
True.
I don't think if you're asking me if the Warriors are bracket proof, I would say absolutely not. But there's some time. There's some time for them. You alluded to who they might play in their schedule coming up, and honestly, let's see if let's see how they integrate Jonathan Kuminga, because Jonathan Kuminga is a very difficult player to have on this team. He's a guy
Yeah,
who has to play, but he's a guy who has not always helped the Warriors, even if he's playing well himself. So that's
true.
going to be interesting to see how Steve Kerr manages that.
That's a really good point. I wasn't even thinking about Kuminga. It's easy to forget about him. He's been out for months. So they're going to have to reincorporate him into the lineup. And yeah, for sure, there could be some difficulty there, some growing pains, because he doesn't offer that level of spacing that a lot of other guys in the court offer. So no, 100% agree. That's going to really determine kind of how they go forward from here.